Welcome to our data-centric AI webinar. This is number 9 in the series. Today, talking about AI and the human labor that is still essential for many AI activities. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We are recording this webinar as far as I can tell, and we'll share the recording on various channels we're using because we want to make sure that the work and the thinking of our brilliant speakers is promoted as widely as possible. And we may also use quotes and other snippets from this recording in future communications. If you do like to ask questions, please do so. Please ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature of Zoom. And there's also my colleagues, Neil, Matt, and Joe in the ODI office who are here to help in the chat if you have any additional questions. As I was saying at the beginning, this is a webinar in a series that has started last summer. This is just an overview of the variety of topics related to data-centric AI that we have featured so far. And all recordings are available via this QR code. We featured a number of topics from various scientific, technical, legal, operational, ethical perspectives of data and AI in the last 9 months. And today, I am really happy to talk to Dr. Saif Savage, who's an assistant professor at Northeastern University. I'm just going to briefly introduce you, Saif, if that's okay. So I said she's an assistant professor at Northeastern University in the Curry College of Computer Sciences, where she works at the intersection between human-computer interaction, AI, and civic tech. Her bio looks very, very impressive with a number of accolades. She's one of the 35 innovators under 35, according to MIT Technology Review. She's a recipient of the Google Anita Borg Scholarship, a fellow for the Center for Democracy and Technology, and her work has been featured widely in the media, including here in the UK, in the BBC, and The Economist, but also New York Times, Deutsche Welle, and others. Her work has been published and awarded at some of the most prestigious conferences at the intersection between human-computer interaction and AI. And the topic that she's going to discuss today is very close to my heart as well. For some time, I've been doing work in an area called microtask crowdsourcing, which is an academic technical term that stands for the types of activities that sometimes and increasingly more and more are outsourced to a number of digital platforms. And Saif has done extensive research about and with these platforms that she's going to talk about today. So with that, welcome, Saif. We're really, really excited to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Elena. It's such a great honor to be here. I'm really excited to be part of your community and be able to share my research. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. Hello, so I'm Dr. Savage, and today I will be presenting how to design data-driven systems for worker collective action. This is research that I have done at Northeastern University and also with the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, in Mexico City. A question I'm very interested about is thinking, well, how might we design AI systems that can empower gig workers? Gig work focuses on small tasks that people do for wages to a number of different clients. And gig work has been on the rise. It is expected that by 2027, 60% of the US workforce will be involved with work that involves having a computer mediate the labor. And so, in general, gig work has a number of AI algorithms and data that is involved with it. On one hand, you have AI algorithms that are dispatching tasks to workers to get them from one place to another. You are also working with large-scale heterogeneous data, and that is coming in real time, and you have the system where the system needs to make decisions about where to dispatch the worker based on how well they did for a task, what the client thought about them. And so you have real-time algorithms that have to work with this massive large-scale data. And we've been able to deploy these systems within different parts of the world. And so several of you might say, well, it seems that the problem is solved. We have already working AI systems that are operating in gig work. Why exactly is it that you're so excited about this area? We have made progress in creating these AI algorithms for gig platforms, but the reality is that usually these platforms, these AI algorithms, focus on benefiting the gig platform and overlook the well-being of the worker. Part of the problem is that gig platforms are currently black boxes, so this means that you do not know exactly what is taking place inside the gig platform. And if you do not know what is taking place inside the gig platform, it becomes hard to understand. Well, for example, I suffered an accident in the platform. So was this accident just something that happened to me, or is 60% of the workforce of this gig platform also experiencing this accident? And so it's hard to identify if something is an isolated issue or if it's a systemic problem. And because also policymakers don't understand what is happening inside the gig platform, it's hard for them to regulate and provide better opportunities for workers. Additionally, the lack of data means that workers can be easily manipulated. And so the platform can manipulate the worker to work more time. For example, Uber had a phrase about, hey, let's Uber on. If you continue working for, let's say in the next hour, you're going to be able to increase your wages due to surge pricing by 60%. But then the worker might not actually get that raise. And the problem is that the worker without access to the data doesn't actually know what is the likelihood that they will be able to obtain that surge, that higher salary that the platform is actually offering to them. And so this is why I'm very interested in thinking about, okay, so how might we design AI systems that can empower workers? I propose the following in order to address this problem. This is part of my NSF Career Award. It's a grant from the National Science Foundation in the United States that focuses on supporting my research career. This research, so I argue that in order to design these AI systems for workers, we need first systems that can allow workers to be able to collect their own workplace data. This way, if workers have access to their own workplace data, they can then understand their problems. They can then also do something about their problems and also propose solutions to the problems. However, just giving workers access to the data is not enough. We need also systems that allow workers to be able to understand the problems and also propose solutions. And so then I propose systems that allow workers to interact with each other, understand the problem, and address them. Additionally, I also think that it's important to design systems that once workers have their solutions in place, they can then execute them. They can then complete those solutions. And I'm arguing for also, so the NSF Career Award focuses also on having education aspect. And so I'm also arguing for example, teaching workers about AI so that they can have a better negotiation on the table. This way they can understand, okay, you know what, this AI might be problematic. We want to talk with management about whether or not we want to see that type of AI in our workplace. Additionally, I want also workers to be able to use the tools that I'm creating for them. And so I'm also working on workshops that allow workers to utilize the tools that I'm creating. So today, in today's talk, we're going to go through these research aims that I have and a little bit of the teaching education that I'm creating. So let's start with tools for allowing workers to be able to collect their own workplace data. So on one hand, gig platforms actually have a lot of data about workers. And right now they're using that data, as I mentioned, for the benefit of the platform. And so workers get many times highly surveilled. They're constantly being watched by the platform. And this data is overall used for the benefit of the platform. And so I'm interested in empowering workers with their own workplace surveillance autonomy, with their own workplace data. And so here I connect with Foucault, who argues that in order to fight when somebody is surveilling you, you have to then do the surveillance yourself. And so he argues that surveillance is when somebody in power is monitoring somebody who does not have power. For example, a boss monitoring the worker. And he proposes that to fight that, you need sousveillance. Sousveillance focuses on the person who does not have power now being able to monitor those in power. And so I focus on designing these types of sousveillance systems for workers. Now, workers are not data experts, and so it wasn't obvious what type of sousveillance tools do workers want to have. And so first I focused on understanding, well, what kind of sousveillance technologies do gig workers want to have? And so in order to address this question, I held interviews and co-design sessions with gig workers to understand how they imagined and desired sousveillance tools. We then analyzed the qualitative responses and we created design principles. So this is an example of the type of tool that workers wanted to see. And this work was published recently in CAI. It's one of our top HCI conferences. So workers wanted tools through which they could do the monitoring of their workplace directly in their digital labor platform. So we thought of creating then tools through which they could collect their own data on their web on the website through web plugins. And they were also interested in collecting data about the amount of unpaid labor that they have to do. Now, in digital labor platforms, there is a significant amount of unpaid labor that workers have to do, which is different than traditional workplaces. So for example, usually if you're, let's say, a secretary and you're responding to an email from your boss, you get paid for that time that you're investing in responding to that email to your boss. In digital labor platforms, that does not happen. So the time that you're spending responding to emails from your boss is time that you have to pay yourself. Nobody is going to pay you for replying to a client, even though if you do not reply to a client, for example, to your boss, it's likely that you're not going to get paid. It's likely that you're not going to be able to make an actual income. So the digital labor platform is asking you to do work for which you do not, for which if you do not complete it, you're not going to get paid. And so it is an essential part of your labor, but they decided that they're not going to pay you. And so workers were very interested in being able to track the amount of unpaid labor that they had to do, because they felt that then they could potentially do something about it, for example, go with policymakers. And so based on this, we then created tools that allow us to quantify just how much invisible labor are workers doing. We published this work in CSEW. So here, for example, somebody is logging into a digital labor platform called Amazon Mechanical Turk. The person is working. Right now they're searching for tasks. All of this time, this is unpaid labor. So the searching for tasks is also something for which normally, for example, if you're in a traditional office, you get paid to figure out what is the next thing that you're going to be working on for the team, etc. And these digital labor platforms, you do not get paid for the amount of time that you have to invest in searching for tasks to do. And so our web plugin, which is here, and so if you see this little play button, this is our little web plugin that is tracking the amount of time that it's taking people to do the different tasks that they have. Oh, sorry. And so this platform allows us to start to track the amount of unpaid labor that workers do while they're searching for tasks, and then also while they're, for example, inspecting the requirements of the task. And then like they might enter, for example, they're looking at the different tasks that they could do, what are the characteristics of the tasks, and then here finally they're doing an actual task. And here the platform allows you to, our tool allows you to quantify, okay, you spent this much time searching for tasks, this much time viewing the profile of the client, and here the person is actually completing work, which in this case was a short survey that they were asked to do. And here the person is completing the work, and the platform is tracking that amount of time that it's taking them. And so here we see that the platform is tracking, okay, how much time have you invested in these different things? Now, we connected then with journalists, and by giving them this quantification, they were able to then write news reports about, hey, this is happening in these digital labor platforms. This is something that we need to, this is a problem that we need to start looking at. And then we connected also with policymakers who, thanks to the journalist and thanks to our tools that were quantifying it, started to be able to understand the problem and then, for example, reach out to digital labor platforms and say, hey, what's happening here? And so through that, we can start to create change. Mexico's Ministry of Labor also started to create new labor laws about digital platforms, asking them to be much more transparent. Especially around the algorithms and the data that is collected about the workers. And so I think these initiatives are important because without the quantification of what is happening in the platform, it's very hard for policymakers to step in and do something because they just don't understand. It's hard for them to understand the problem. It's hard for them to understand, okay, just how bad is it? But once you start to quantify it, you can help them to then start to take more action. And then I think that, okay, so right now we're enabling people to be able to collect their own workplace data. The next thing is now that we have the data, let's design with workers interfaces that can help them to be able to understand their different problems and then take action. And so part of my other research also focuses on creating interfaces, data-driven interfaces that allow workers to understand their problems and then start to address them. So we propose the following system, which we called GigSense. Basically, the system focuses on collecting all of the data from workers. This can come from the web plugins that we're creating, also from digital forums where workers are sharing their problems. And then we have generative AI systems, a generative AI that is going through the data, structuring it for the workers to understand what is happening, and then presenting it back as, okay, look, these are the problems that are present. These are the different problems that are present in the platform. And then we have an interface where workers can collaborate with each other to create solutions to the problem. And they can also work with the AI to help them enhance the solution. So we have a problem summary and we have then also a collaborative solution. But we wanted that workers did not just copy and paste the solution from the AI. We're promoting that they start to collaborate with each other. And so this is how our interface looks like. On one hand, we have on the right an interface where workers can see a summary of a problem. And then they can see on below an AI solution. And then they have a collaborative solution where they're working together to solve that problem. Here, an interesting thing to observe is that we put the collaborative solution in a hierarchy above the AI solution so that they're not just prompted to copy and paste what the AI is saying, but rather they're taking the time to work together towards a solution, and that they can use the AI for helping them to respond. We ran a user study where we had one group working on our solution, on our interface, GigSense, and another using a traditional interface. And we found that with our tool, people were able to identify problems in a faster way and propose solutions in a faster way than using the control. And also, they were able to propose solutions that were more feasible than in the control condition. So the y-axis on the first graph showcases time, and so we're seeing that we're faster. And the second graph showcases the feasibility of solutions. And so we're also seeing that our interface was better for helping workers to come up with solutions that were more feasible. This is important because a lot of times workers don't have the time to participate in understanding their problems, proposing their solutions. So these types of interfaces can help them to work more easily, participate in collective action, and more easily start to work together towards addressing their community problems, because not everyone has the time. And now another thing that I was interested in is, another thing that I was interested in was about thinking of, okay, we created a solution where we were able to take the data from workers and help them to identify the problems. But another thing is that within gig platforms, you have workers from very diverse backgrounds. And we were interested in thinking about, well, how might we design now systems that can empower those workers with those different backgrounds? And we started to think about culturally aware AI tools for the workers. This was another research that we published at CSCW. So culture theory tells us that people have different perceptions of time based on their different cultures. So, for example, people who are from the global north, and usually people from the global north, for example, Europe, the United States, Canada, they're considered that they view time as something that is not flexible, that is very strict and structured. And so they prefer strict schedules. They want to focus on one task at a time and having everything be much more structured. So for example, if they say, I'm working right now, in this time window, I'm working, and then in this other time window, I'm going to be socializing. And they're very strict about that because they view time as something that is not flexible, but rather something that is very rigid. Whereas cultures, according to culture theory, cultures from the global south, for example, this includes Latin America, some of the Asian countries, they are much more, they view time as flexible. So this means, for example, if I'm doing a particular task, it's okay if I'm interrupted and I start to do another task. And so they enjoy a lot multitasking, and many times they will prioritize social interactions over work. Because for them, for example, if you're doing work, since time is flexible, it's okay to suddenly be interrupted to engage with your grandmother. And so, for example, in this case, you have a person who is working away on the bus, and that's acceptable for them. And they're also having a conversation with their friends on the bus. And this is a workspace that is considered acceptable for them. Now, something to consider is that a majority of the digital labor platforms are designed from the global north. So this means that given that they're designed from the global north, for example, they're designed to be very structured in terms of how they view time. They penalize many times if workers are multitasking. And so we start to think about, well, how might we change this dynamic? How about we create AI tools that can adapt to the worker's different cultural background? And would that change anything? So what we did is that we created a tool called Culture Fit, which categorizes workers into either being from the global north or global south. And here this is related to being monochronic or polychronic. And we have them do, the tool has them do a survey to classify them. So we're not just considering their region, but we're actually using a predefined survey that has been used for decades to categorize people into either being from global north, global south. And then the tool adapts to the worker's background based on the culture that it detected for the worker, and it presents to the worker tasks to do based on the worker's background. So, for example, this is the case of the workers from the global north. In this case, the tool, it also acts as a web plugin. It's showcasing a list of tasks that the worker can do. And these tasks are only recommended when the worker is within their digital labor platform, when the worker has established, this is the time schedule that I'm going to be working in. And so the tool for the workers from the global north is saying, okay, you know what? Here's your scheduled and your structured work recommendations. You are ready to go. For workers from the global south, the tool does the same thing. It also, if they're on the digital labor platform, it presents to them a list of tasks to do. However, the tool can also present the task when the worker is doing other activities. For example, maybe the person is looking for wedding dresses and they're on a search engine. The tool is also going to be presenting to them tasks that they can potentially do. The person might also be, for example, maybe creating on PowerPoint their wedding invitations. The tool will also recommend to them tasks that they can do. So this tool allows for people to be working on completely different things, personal things, and it's still going to be able to recommend them tasks to do. It also, in the case for the monochronic workers, the tool limits any type of social notifications for these workers from the ones from the global south. It allows them to have a lot more notifications from their different social media platforms. Again, assuming that global south cultures will value those types of social interactions, even if it's interrupting their work. We conducted a user study where we had workers from global south, global north use our tool, and then also be in a control condition. We identified that workers, and then we measured first their original wages without our intervention, and then how much our tool increased their wages. We identified that workers using our tool were able to, especially polychronic workers, it was the only condition that was significant. So workers who were from the global south who were using our tool, we were able to increase their wages by 258%, and this was the only case that was significant. For the other cases, for example, we see increases, but this is due to the market fluctuation that exists on digital labor platforms. The only one that was significant was the one for the polychronic, for the condition of global south using our tool. So what might be happening? Well, if you think about it, it might be that the workers who are from the global south, this is the first time that they have access to tools, recommender systems that are tailored for them. And so this means that the tool is creating a drastic difference in their wages. For the workers from the global north, maybe they've always had access to tools that are adapted to them. So our tool is not really doing much for them. And so based on this, we're arguing that, you know what, it can help to design for the workers who are sometimes forgotten in our designs. For example, in this case, specifically focusing on designing for the global south. And you can have much more impact by designing for these forgotten populations. So thinking about this idea is that we've been designing for rural workers in the United States. So right now, a lot of rural communities in the United States have many times been forgotten. A lot of tools are not designed for them. And so we have been focusing on creating tools that can help them to find digital labor, And we argue that this is especially important for this population because a lot of rural workers have to leave their hometowns to find jobs in the city, and so their towns become ghost towns. So what we did was that we started to partner with public libraries. Here is a map of West Virginia. And an interesting thing to know about the United States is that this is the state of West Virginia. It's a purely rural town, purely rural state. This, right now, you have access to the counties of the state, and this is color-coded based on the economic levels of the county. It turns out that counties that are highly distressed economically, they still have public libraries. So the blue stars are public libraries. So, for example, you notice that highly distressed regions still have public libraries. And why is this important? Well, because we are leveraging the public libraries as spaces where we can take the workers and help them to learn, help them to use the computers to teach them digital skills. And so I think it's important that we design for populations that have been forgotten, but also we learn to leverage the public infrastructure that exists. In this case, by connecting with the public libraries, we were able to provide now better opportunities for the workers in these regions. I've also been working with Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we've been designing AI tools that connect with the Mexican culture to create AI agents for the government. In this case, AI agents that help in the passport process. I've also been working with Mexico's Ministry of Women in Mexico City. And here the government workers are providing follow-up and support to victims of domestic violence. And we've also been identifying what are the best interfaces for helping the government workers to provide follow-up to victims of domestic violence, also connecting with the Mexican culture and the work practices of these employees. So overall, I believe there is a lot of value in designing AI technologies that can empower workers to have access to their own workplace data. And I think that it's important that we think about what does the design of tools, AI tools, look like in this space. And I'm very excited about uniting forces with all of you for promoting and creating a worker-centric, data-driven future. Well, thank you all very much. It was great to be here with you all. And here's my contact information.
We leave this on screen for a few more seconds. But thank you, Saif. I mean, absolutely impressive work. I also like the practical tools and the work that you're doing with government as well to make sure that the sort of research, human computer interaction research and tools that came out of your work also have impact in policy and through other means. So very, very impressive. We're now moving to the Q&A part. I already have a few questions. Keep them coming. There is one that I'm going to start us off, which I think sets the tone quite nicely. So someone is asking whether this approach that you have taken to acknowledge the differences in time management, for instance, in the global north and global south, you use the same type of approach, but instead focus on other divisions within labor, say for neurotypical, neurodiverse workers. So if you could speculate, if you've done any work on that, or otherwise, if you could share your thoughts on how we would cater for these diverse needs.
That's a really great question. I have not worked with or looked at neurodivergent workers. We have worked with people who have other types of disabilities, particularly visual impairments. And for example, next week we're going to be at CAI. It's one of our HCI conferences, and I'm going to be presenting on our work on designing generative AI tools that support developers who are visually impaired. And so I think you're absolutely right. It's very interesting to look at different people's needs and then designing tools for them. I do think that there's also value in connecting with the research of culture theory, because they've done a lot of work on understanding different geographical regions, and that can also be helpful for us to design tools for them.
That's yeah. So sounds great. Thank you. So the series here is on data-centric AI. So we want to look at AI across various activities. There's a lot of focus on foundational models and large language models that people, particularly developers, can use to build new products and services. So With this program, we want to emphasize the role of data in these developments. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your observations or your research into how workers contribute to data work in AI.
Yeah, so for example, the research that we did for the workers and culturally aware AI, this was completely focused on data workers.
Mm-hmm.
These are workers on the Toloco platform, where
Mm-hmm.
basically they're doing labeling of AI algorithms,
Mm-hmm.
and data that is going to be fed into an AI algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that and so and also the when I presented the quantification of the unpaid labor, that was
Mm-hmm.
also done on a data on a data labeling platform, which is
Mm-hmm.
Amazon Mechanical Turk.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to, on one hand, identify that these workers have to do a lot of unpaid labor. And so it can be important for us to think about how we can best support these workers in the unpaid labor, that in the great amount of unpaid labor that they had to have to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so thinking about data-driven tools that can better support them in this unpaid
Mm-hmm.
labor, given the injustices that exist in their workplace. I
Mm-hmm.
also think that it's useful to think about how AI can enhance them without the workers also being penalized for using AI. So thinking about what type of tasks maybe the worker could receive support from the AI, but they're still doing their significant part of their work of their cognition as a human.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's very very useful insights. It's just for someone who's not familiar at all with this, but obviously lots of people have heard about gig work and about Uber. So could you give us a sense of just how big of a market this is? So how where are these platforms based? How many people are we actually talking about? What's an example of a task? So I imagine everyone in the audience or everyone who's been watching these recordings will have heard of ChatGPT, maybe Stable Diffusion. So what sort of work are we actually talking about?
Yeah. So to train these large language models, you need to give them data. So a lot of them work with supervised machine learning models where you have data and you have also labels for the data. For example, maybe you give the generative AI model a series of pictures of cats, and those pictures are labeled, these are cats. You have to have a human get in and start to do that classification. So that's a type of task that the workers on these digital labor platforms would do. They would see the picture of a cat and write down cat. See a
Uh-huh.
picture of a dog and write down dog. See another
Uh-huh.
picture of a cat and that's a cat. So those are some of the types of tasks that workers on these digital labor platforms would be doing.
Uh-huh. Thank you for the explanation. And of course, now some of you may have heard that these large language models and similar foundation models that have been released in the last 2-3 years operate in a slightly different way. So they learn themselves in something called self-learning, but at the same time, there is a lot of human labor involved in fine-tuning these models. So once a model is pre-trained, it's not released to the public. No matter how many hallucinations you would have experienced in ChatGPT and models like that have been tested to create some of those safeguards that we see in place today, and that is manual work. Another example is content moderation, where you need a lot of human oversight to be able that the algorithms that platforms like on social media are deploying really achieve that 95% accuracy that they achieve. But for that, there's a lot of content moderators who are subjected to watching some horrendous content and classifying it according to the rules that these platforms define. So I thought it was important to provide this context, and essentially the media has been talking about it, but what we have heard less of is exactly those sort of interventions that SAFE was describing today. There's another question I see here. What are some of the ways we can make sure model developers are made aware of the labor and labor conditions that go into data and AI work? So some of this work happens now via contractors. So there is certainly an asymmetry where the individual developer or even some departments in some companies may not be fully aware of the entire supply chain. I was wondering if you could comment on that. So how could we make engineers, developers more aware of what is happening and what they could do about the issues that you have raised?
So on one hand, for example, there is some conversation about possibly creating similar to how we have labels for food that says, okay, you know what, this food was sourced within a fair, maybe a fair trade an initiative, ensuring that there were certain labor conditions that were met. We could also imagine that maybe AI models could follow that. So, for example, if you're an engineer and you're going to be deciding with what models to operate with, you have labels that can tell you, okay, this model was trained with workers that were paid a minimum wage, that had access to maybe these benefits, or just in general, like were ensured a fair wage. That could be something that could be really good to connect with. For example, Oxford's Fair Work Institute focuses a lot on providing information about how fair different digital labor platforms are. I think that's a great step forward in being able to better understand this ecosystem, but maybe to help that everyone better sees it, it could be that AI companies start to provide those types of maybe certificates or seals related to their models.
There's an interesting, very interesting idea, and I wasn't aware of the work of the Oxford Institute about this, because of course there's hundreds and hundreds of these platforms now. So when we were starting out in crowdsourcing and human computation, we would be using something like Mechanical Turk, which you have already mentioned. In the UK, we're also using a platform called Prolific, which is a startup at the University of Oxford. But there's hundreds and hundreds of these platforms, and so having some sort of guidance on the ones that do, or at least are trying to do the right thing, and having frameworks to understand how good looks like, in terms of wages, in terms of conditions, in terms also for reproducibility for the developers who want their data to be labeled, would be a great starting point. So if anyone wants to work on this, by all means get in touch also with the ODI team, because that's something that's a sort of data set that we would love to contribute to. I'm going to move us on to the next question. So this is a little bit about, so there's something about legislation here. So the sort of tools that you have presented, do you see a tension? And if yes, how would you reconcile this sort of tool with the increased focus on AI's negative effects on worker privacy, especially in the EU, maybe also in other legislative environments? So for instance, in the EU, certain applications of AI are forbidden. So those related to employee emotional monitoring, for instance, and there's also specific considerations around workers' privacy. Could you comment how we should manage that balance between the sort of tools you presented and this sort of regulation?
I think part of the solution is designing with and for workers. So, for example, some workers have expressed to us that they actually wanted to have emotion recognition
Okay.
involved in their work, like workplace tools that could help them to identify emotion recognition. However, they wanted to be the only ones that had access to that data. Why?
Mhm.
Because they didn't want, for example, suddenly their boss judging them if a certain day they were depressed and they were having a hard time, but they did want to use that data for them to take action. This
Mhm.
was especially present for the government workers that we were collaborating with in Mexico City, who were working with the victims of domestic violence. They
Mhm.
wanted to have an AI system that could detect, for example, okay, I've been through listening through a lot of
I want an
horrific
AI that can
domestic
help me to
violence
detect that
stories.
and
I'm
tell
not
me,
even
hey, you know what, you need
realizing
to take a
that
break.
right now,
Mhm.
but they didn't want that data to be
Yes.
shared with other people due to they were worried they could be judged,
Mhm.
etc. And so I think part of the solution there is thinking about not just prohibiting it, like all right, like okay, we're not going to do it. I think there's value in understanding the workers' needs and the workers' perspectives in
Mhm.
how you're designing these AI technologies.
Mhm. That's very, very interesting, and of course something that speaks a lot to this empowerment theme. On a related note, and especially since you've been working with government organizations in different countries, so in the UK, in Europe, and elsewhere, there's a lot of conversations that are happening around the rights of data labelers and the degree to which existing legislation is covering for this to some degree emerging type of work. What is your opinion on that?
I think that's great. I think what we can do as researchers is helping them to understand this new type of labor that exists. Because part of the problem is that before, because they didn't understand it, it was very hard for them to regulate it and to fight for better conditions for the workers. And so I think that part of the solution is providing ways in which the policymakers can understand what's happening in these digital labor platforms so that they can facilitate and help to promote better opportunities for the workers and also for the clients as well that are using the platforms.
Yeah. So we were I think last November we hosted um, a data empowerment fund conference, and I was on a panel with a number of researchers, but we're also with content moderators. And one of the challenges that was raised was the fact that the supply chains are international. So while there may be efforts to promote legislation in one country, sometimes some countries face tensions between the need to create jobs and to look attractive for a big business and the duty of care they have to their own citizens. Um, have you seen any improvements in this space? Say beyond awareness, do you see any changes that things are moving in the right direction?
So I feel it is very hard because, for example, in the United States, we used to have an AI, like a responsible AI blueprint. And that one got shut down because they said exactly what you mentioned about, well, this is hurting the US competitiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I had some meetings with big tech companies, and they were very happy because they were like, okay, now it's our time to, the US is open for innovation, et cetera. And so a lot of companies do use that to maybe they just see it as innovation, et cetera, and they get excited, but that means that they could be overlooking how certain populations are treated. So in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, for example, in that space, it's a little bit sad to see that, for example, even if you had an AI regulation, you can go back and say like, okay, no, this isn't going to advance.
Mhm.
I think what helped me, to be honest, to keep hope was I went to Colombia, and we learned about how they had fought like the whole drug cartels, and created peace in their country. And it was a lot about understanding that you move forward and then you move back, and you move
Mhm.
forward, and it's just understanding that that's the process. But you're still, each time you are still advancing, being able to advance a little bit, even if you suddenly get pushed
Yeah. Yeah.
significantly back. And so that gave me a lot of hope, because I think it's understanding that not everything is linear in terms of how you can advance, but rather
Mhm.
it's, you have to keep pushing. For example, I was very excited to see Mexico create the regulations around having transparent algorithms and data from the digital labor platform. So that was actually amazing to see.
That's I mean, absolutely. And this is a good segue actually into my final questions, because we're almost out of time. Say, how do you envision the uptake of labor support tools like the ones that you have presented, given the still insanely accelerative pace of AI right now? So what would you say to large platforms, to data labeling startups, to other players in the AI ecosystem about the need to um, adopt these types of tools? Why does it make sense? Why does it make business sense for them to do the right thing?
Oh, so you're talking, well, I think it makes sense to do the right thing, because you could argue that it's a win-win. So, for example, if you
Uh-huh.
have happy workers, they might be more productive, they might produce higher quality work. And so I don't think that you have to create an equation where only one actor is the one that benefits.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, there's also evidence that this is a lot of evidence, in fact, that if you improve the conditions of data workers, of data labelers, this will lead to um, efficiencies, but also this will make workers continue to engage with you, which has huge advantages, especially as AI is used in a number of specialist domains that require lots of training. So with that, we reach the end of our Q&A. So I'm going to wrap up our ninth, oh, apologies, webinar by just pointing you again to our data-centric AI program that has been running since November 2023. So quite some time, where we aim to advance collectively our thinking on how to build and shape that essential social technical data infrastructure of AI that includes not just data sets and technologies, but also standards, practices, and communities like the one SAFE is supporting with her work. I also wanted to take the opportunity to make you aware of a report that is going to be published very soon, but by the ODI. So very timely. We have been mapping the role of data work in AI supply chains with a number of case studies. The report, as far as I understood from the team, is available in an early draft for download. So we'd love to hear your feedback on that. Our next webinar is going to be early June. We are going to be looking next at data-centric AI in relation to local government in the UK and elsewhere. So we're going to be featuring a panel with experts from a number of companies, local authorities, and the ODI. We hope to be able to announce the date very soon. But with that, I'd like to thank SAFE again for a fascinating presentation and for the discussions, and to thank my team as well, Neil, Matt, and Joe at the ODI. We will make the recording available, as I said at the beginning. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you soon in a few weeks' time. Bye-bye.